Coming up, the geopolitics of the South China Sea.
The Chinese have said to me, they say, why should we be any different than you Americans in the Caribbean?
Author Robert Kaplan discusses China's maritime ambition, geography, and rivalry with America. It's just ahead on Global Ethics Forum.
It is my pleasure to welcome back a very good friend of the Consul's, Bob Kaplan. He will be discussing his newest book entitled Asia's Cauldron, the South China Sea and the End of a Stable Pacific. There are few places in the world our speaker has not visited nor written about in his 16 previously published books or in the numerous magazine articles he has penned. Possessing the uncanny ability to see conflicts looming on the horizon well in advance, he travels to countries that most of us would not even consider, whether they are in Europe, Africa, or in Asia. Having returned, he writes about them and tells us what he has seen. In Asia's Cauldron, Bob turns his geopolitical gaze to the South China Sea to talk about the conflicts brewing in East Asia.
First of all, let me say a word about China's geography. If you had a grandson or a son sitting on your knee and he said, tell me about China. What is China? What is it? You would start with a map, and you would start by saying the northernmost part of China, Manchuria, Harbin, is the same latitude as Maine. And the southernmost part of China, Hainan Island in the South China Sea, is the same latitude as the Florida Keys. So what does that tell you? That China occupies the temperate zone, like the United States. It has 9,000 kilometers of very advantageous coastline in the temperate zone in the subtropics on the Pacific, where all the global sea lines converge. And on the whole western side of China, it fronts mineral-rich, hydrocarbon-rich, former Soviet Central Asia. So it's got a vast continental spread. Now, geography tells contradictory stories. Let me give you two contradictions about China, which will lead me into a discussion of the South China Sea. China is bigger than it appears on the map because, for instance, there are only 7 million people in the Russian Far East, but it's filled with timber, diamonds, gold, uranium, and all sorts of other natural resources. Right across the border, there are 100 million people in Manchuria. And that part of the Russian Far East was the part that China ruled up until the mid-19th century. And China is expanding its influence into a Russian Far East that is losing population. As little as it is, it's getting lower, and of which China covets all the natural resources and is in a position to project power into the Russian Far East, one of many reasons why Russia can never wholly trust China. Russia can have a tactical alliance with China, but not a strategic one. In the far west of China, China is building roads, pipelines, and railways throughout the former republics of Soviet Central Asia, all the way to the Caspian Sea. China covets Kazakhstan's oil, Turkmenistan's natural gas. China is flush with cash and erecting an empire of sorts in the former Soviet Central Asian republics. Putin doesn't fear the West and Central Asia, whatever he says. He fears the Chinese. Southeast Asia, China has been applying a divide and conquer strategy through all the countries, none of which by itself can really compete with China. And Thailand's weakness, the weakening of the Thai political system, which is a whole other lecture in itself, it helps China in this respect, because Thailand was the bulwark of the West, the strategic bulwark of the West and Southeast Asia, and is increasingly less so. All right, that's the good news for China geographically. The bad news geographically is that China is a claustrophobic island of Han Chinese in the arable lowland cradle in the center and the east of China, surrounded within its borders by minorities with which it's often had a very bad relationship. Inner Mongolians in the north, Turkic Muslim Uyghurs in the west, Tibetans in the southwest. And all these minority plateau uplands are generally where the water is, where the strategic minerals, the strategic metals are. So the minorities occupy the most valuable piece of real estate in China. The Chinese leadership cannot trust it, and the ultimate fear and nightmare of China's leaders is that China will go through a tumultuous economic and social and maybe even political transition, which will lead to sustained minority unrest to a much greater degree than we've seen. And times of unrest, of economic upheaval, often lead regimes to dial up nationalism as a default option. And where is nationalism being dialed up? In the South China Sea and to the north of Taiwan in the East China Sea. What is the South China Sea? I call it the Asian Mediterranean because just as the Mediterranean is the center of a world, the South China Sea is the center of a world too. It's the throat of international commerce, where most of the hydrocarbon shipments, most of the merchant trade, the container ships all come together. And it's no secret why. The Indian Ocean is the world's global energy interstate, because most of the hydrocarbons, the oil and natural gas, are in the Arabian Peninsula and the Iranian Plateau. And most of the customers increasingly are in the burgeoning middle-class flesh pots of coastal China, South Korea, and Japan. And so the oil, the natural gas, comes by supertanker from the Middle East across the Indian Ocean. Got news for you. A lot may have changed in technology, but the Strait of Malacca is no wider today than it was 400 years ago. And that's the most direct entry point into Asia. So that it comes through the Strait of Malacca, also the Banda and Sunduk Straits, and all into the South China Sea, on its way to coastal China, Japan, South Korea. It's also where a lot of merchant shipping comes through, because remember, East Asia, to the degree that the world economy has a geographical center, it's East Asia. Two of the three largest economies, Japan and China, or rather than reverse order, are in East Asia, and South Korea is not too far behind. Again, all that traffic through the South China Sea. The South China Sea, unlike the Mediterranean proper, the real Mediterranean, has significant deposits of oil and natural gas on its own. How much is open to dispute, and there's a whole, I call it, geological debate about this. But there are certainly significant deposits about this. Now, if you look at the South China Sea, you say, China claims an historic line that's called the cow's tongue. This whole underbelly, the whole 80% of the South China Sea, it's an historic line. It's not a legal line. Now, the Vietnamese, the Filipinos, the Malaysians, they claim what they call legal lines based on the law of the sea treaty. Now, the law of the sea treaty is complicated, it's boring, but it's actually simple. It's not about the sea, it's about the land. It's because where your land is tells you how much you can claim in the water. And so the Vietnamese are claiming 200 miles out in this direction. The Filipinos are claiming 200 miles out in this direction. And on it goes, and the Chinese are claiming the whole thing, or 80% of the whole thing. And so people say, well, why are the Chinese so aggressive? Why are they so, why do they, there's no reason for this. They don't need this. No. The Chinese have wonderful reasons for claiming all of this. And it's people, there's been a lot in the media, on the blogs and the foreign policy blogs that East Asia is like before World War I. China's the Kaiser's Germany, and new nationalism, new industrialization. It's 1914 Europe. I've been in print debunking this. I don't believe this. First of all, World War I was a history and culture transforming event because it went on for 4 years. It was only in 1916, in the Battle of the Somme, where history really changed in Europe. World War I killed 17 million people, soldiers and civilians. World War I was about land armies on a crowded civilian landscape in a claustrophobic subcontinent of Western Eurasia, essentially. Europe is a landscape, Asia is a seascape. Asia's maritime. That makes all the difference. And the claims are not contesting civilian areas. They're contesting bare rocks, seas, so that any war that starts is going to be a short, sharp war. It's not going to go on for years and years, most likely. No, World War I is not the right metaphor. The right metaphor, and this is where you get to understand the Chinese logic, is what the Americans did in the Caribbean in the 19th and early 20th century. Because the Caribbean is the American Mediterranean. The New World, the Western Hemisphere, is not divided between North and South America. It's divided between the area north of the Amazonian jungle and the area south of the Amazonian jungle. That's the real barrier. Because almost everyone in Venezuela, Colombia, and the Guyanas lives on the Caribbean coast. They don't live in the south towards the jungle. So what the Americans did in the 19th and early 20th century was they gained strategic control of the Caribbean. And by doing so, they became dominant in the Western Hemisphere. And by dominating a hemisphere, they became a hegemon. And that allowed them to affect the balance of power in the Eastern Hemisphere, the other hemisphere. And that is what the history of the 20th century was all about. America tipping the balance in 2 world wars and in the Cold War. And what the Chinese desire now is, the Chinese have said to me, they say, why should we be any different than you Americans in the Caribbean? You Americans were rapacious. You had gained dominance over a continent, and then you sought quite naturally, and it was your right, to gain dominance over the adjacent blue water extension of that continent. That is all what we're trying to do. Because with that blue water extension, the Asian Mediterranean, the South China Sea, China then has entry into the wider Pacific. And if you think of the Strait of Malacca as the Panama Canal, it has entry into the Indian Ocean, into the world's global energy interstate. And China becomes not a one-ocean navy, but a two-ocean navy. And with a one-ocean navy, it's just a great regional power in military terms. With a two-ocean navy, it's a great world power. The world is multipolar diplomatically, economically. But it's not multipolar militarily, because despite the disappointments of Iraq and Afghanistan, the U.S. Navy and Air Force still essentially dominate, much global space in East Asia, in Europe, in the Middle East. China's goal is to do likewise, and the South China Sea is as key to that ambition as the Caribbean was to the American vision. What the Chinese seek is to get the Americans not out. They're very moderate. They want the Americans' presence to be diluted in the South China Sea. They want the American Navy not to have the unimpeded access to the South and East China Sea that it has now. And so it has a program of anti-access area denial, which basically means more and more ballistic missiles, more and more cyber warfare capabilities, more and more the quietest, latest diesel-electric submarines, which are better than nuclear submarines in the close territorial, dirty waters of the South China Sea. All of which will not deny Americans access, but will make American admirals think twice and 3 times before they deploy in a certain area. There'll be more decisions to be made, more calculations, and that is the essence of power, to somehow constrict or seem to constrict the actions of your adversary. So China hopes to eventually dilute American naval presence in the South and East China Sea, and by doing so, it will make an end run around Taiwanese sovereignty without having to fight, because it has 1,500 ballistic missiles already focused on Taiwan, but there are 300 commercial flights a week between Taiwan and mainland China. And China hopes to do all this without ever having to fight. That's the goal, never fight. because if you fight the Americans in a fleet-on-fleet battle, you lose. So what the Chinese hope for is their defense budgets keep going up by double digits, American defense budgets go down, and sooner or later they will achieve their goal of diluting America's presence in East Asia, and that will change the whole regional climate. So this is what the Japanese fear. Keep in mind that without American naval and air power, the chances of a war between China and Japan go up dramatically. And the chances of Vietnam, the Philippines, and Malaysia and other countries being Finlandized by China goes up dramatically. Because that's the real fear in the South China Sea, Finlandization. And of a treaty ally, the Philippines, and of actually a more important de facto ally, Vietnam. Vietnam has emerged as arguably America's best ally in East Asia after Japan and South Korea. The Vietnamese are dredging and modernizing Cam Ranh Bay Naval Station for one reason, to draw in more and more visits by U.S. warships. That's what they want. The Vietnamese don't love the United States. They want to use the United States as a balancing power against China. Because as the Vietnamese explain it, we fought only one war against America, but we fought dozens or so against China throughout our history. China is close, so it's a threat. The U.S. is half a world away, so it's not a threat, at least anymore it isn't. The Vietnamese have really calculated this. The biggest question of all of Asia, and I think of the world, is the direction of the Chinese economy. Everyone says, oh, they'll muddle through. It's an authoritarian system. They can fix bank rates, all of this. Maybe true, but I have a feeling all the experts are punting. They don't really want to say what they think because they're not sure about their own opinions. Because it's like predicting the stock market, predicting the direction of the Chinese economy. China has had a good thing going for 33 years. It's had sustained double-digit growth or near double-digit growth. It's had high export, low wages. It created this incredible historic boom, but it's ending. And they talk about, oh, the leadership is committed to rebalancing. Oh, you know, all right, the leadership is smart. They're enlightened authoritarians. They retire at 65. They're not like Bashar al-Assad or dictators in the Middle East. But the fact that they want to transform the economy does not mean that they will be able to do so. In fact, every time there's a mini crisis, it's a new stimulus. It's because they get scared. It's a never-ending stimulus. So China will probably have a decade or so of very tumultuous economic, political, social unrest that will lead to more nationalism, not less nationalism. But maybe not. Maybe it will implode. Maybe China will have, just really have, an upsurge in ethnic violence, in significant social, political unrest. I don't know. But if it's very, very serious, that could affect defense budget spendings, and that could lead to a different scenario than the one I've portrayed. That's why in the book I'm always caveating, saying that I don't know the direction of the Chinese economy, but the direction of China's economy, to me, is the single biggest issue which will determine the state of the world over the next 20 years, more so than if Iran gets the bomb, more so than if a tired empire called the EU and another tired empire called Russia have a competition or so over a buffer state somewhere. It's the direction of the Chinese economy. And I'll end here and take questions. Thank you very much.
Would you talk a little bit more about Japan in this whole picture? Where are they in the armaments race, and where are they likely to go?
Japan now has an existential problem with Chinese military expansion, and the Japanese are extremely nervous about American resolve. One thing you hear throughout East Asia, especially in light of what's seen as American weakness in Europe and elsewhere, is that China is a geographical fact of Asia. America is merely a geopolitical concept. In other words, America doesn't have to maintain as many warships as it does in East Asia. You know, what if defense spending goes down? The Japanese are nervous. They see China as a real threat. Japan, for many years, has had a great military that's gone under the radar screen in the media. It has 4 times as many warships on the high seas as the British Royal Navy, which, by the way, is disappearing before our eyes. It has niche capacities in diesel-electric submarine warfare, in special forces. This is a military that's ready and prepared to fight and gain territory. I think that the United States has 2 problems in the Pacific. One, it's got to balance against Chinese military expansion. But the other problem equally is to keep the Japanese from getting out of hand. Because it's Japan that could lure the U.S. into a war in the Pacific, much more than the Philippines. Because, all right, the Philippines are a treaty ally, but face it, they're a weakly institutionalized nation, the highest rate of corruption in all of Asia. The United States is not going to fight a war with China over the Philippines. You know, the U.S. has too many equities involved with China. But Japan's another story, because Japan's a serious ally. It's the 3rd largest economy. It hosts, 52,000 American servicemen. It's capable now of servicing American nuclear aircraft carrier strike groups. This is one serious ally. So I think although my book is about the South China Sea, because I wrote it as sort of an appendix, a coda to my book on the Indian Ocean several years ago. In terms of if you were to ask me, where is there more of a danger of hostilities breaking out that would involve the United States, I would say the East China Sea between Japan and China.
Hi, my name is Jerry Hulton. I was Undersecretary of the Navy in the 90s. So I appreciate your comments on maritime force. But I want to talk about both. China seems pretty interested in being these great power dialogues with Obama. I'd sort of like to ask you to set that in comparison to what should we do in our relationship with India. I mean, should we focus on great power, or should we develop India like we're somewhat developing Japan?
Yeah, good question. I think Mrs. Obama's trip to Beijing was a geopolitical event, because what it did was it established a personal relationship. It brought out a Chinese first lady into prominence. When have we heard of a Chinese first lady in the past 4 or 5 or 8 decades? In other words, and so what Xi Jinping is doing, he's carving out more of a role as a personality, even as he consolidates power. Even if he, you know, his anti-corruption drive is all about consolidating power, because now they're going after people near the top. And one of the ways you consolidate power is you establish a personality of your family, you know, a personal relationship between leaders. It's all part of this. So China, I think China's goal is we're going to take the South and East China Sea gradually. At the same time, we're going to reach out to the U.S. to stabilize relations so we never have to fight with them. This will all happen quietly. And as far as India is concerned, the very position India occupies on the map means that India's military and economic growth is a plus for the United States without a strategic partnership with India. If the U.S. pressed for a strategic partnership with India, it would ruin it, because the Indians would never go along with that for a host of reasons. Any relationship between the U.S. and India has to be an unofficial understanding. It cannot be written down, so to speak. India's military and economic rise in and of itself balances against China, because India is a separate civilization than China. Look at this. People say that technology is making geography irrelevant. Well, let's look at India and China. India and China had relatively little to do with each other throughout history because of the high wall of the Himalayas. But because military technology has defeated distance, you now have Indian space satellites which do nothing but spy on Chinese airfields. You have Chinese fifth-generation fighter jets in Tibet whose arc of operations can include India. You have Indian intercontinental ballistic missiles that can hit Chinese cities. You have Indian warships in the South China Sea. You have Chinese warships in the Western Indian Ocean. And you have China building or financing state-of-the-art ports in the Indian Ocean all around India. So that technology, rather than defeat geography, has created a whole new strategic geography of competition between India and China. The relationship we have with India now, here's what it is. It's officially quiet. Unofficially, as you know, our Air Force and Navy does many bilateral exercises with the Indian Air Force and Navy that are of a very high quality that neither side brags about or makes much news about. And therefore, it's a relationship to cultivate. One of the problems with the Obama administration is that in the George W. Bush administration, the president himself was invested in moving closer to India. In the Obama administration, there hasn't seemed to be somebody high up in the executive branch who's taken India on as an issue. The South Asia Department in the State Department has historically been weak. It's not where the most ambitious, high-flying diplomats have tended to go to. So it needs somebody in the executive branch who's very high up to really push this relationship.
Well, Bob, I just want to thank you for another wonderful morning,
Thank you.
another
Thank you.
stimulating discussion. Thank you for
My
coming.
pleasure.
For more on this program and other Carnegie Ethics Studio productions, visit carnegiecouncil.org. There you can find video highlights, transcripts, audio recordings, and other multimedia resources on global ethics. This program is made possible by the Carnegie Ethics Studio and viewers like you.